Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC Rich, and I'm joined by my co-MC Rach Shelke. How you doing, Rach?
I'm feeling pretty good for being almost at the end of 2019.
Yeah, this is it. We're about to enter 2020. Where's my flying car? I really miss that.
Oh, wasn't Blade Runner supposed to happen this year?
Yeah, basically. It's crazy. We are in the future. Cyberpunk 2020 is coming on our doorstep, but almost none of Cyberpunk is here, and some of that is really great that it's not here.
Speak for yourself. As someone who works with augmented humans for a living, it has been a really fantastic year for Powered by the Apocalypse, if I would say so myself. We've interviewed so many designers this year to talk about their new and upcoming games. It has me really hyped for the future of Powered by the Apocalypse. Did you know we're coming up to the second decade of Powered by the Apocalypse?
Oh, you're right, Rach. That was released in 2010. A whole decade of Apocalypse Engine games. Wow, good call, Rach.
I mean, talking about the future risks us getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. What were your Powered by the Apocalypse highlights for 2019?
Oh, I played so many PbtA games. I have the fortune of playing with the Gauntlet to run 2 weekly games. Sometimes one of them will be bi-weekly, but I got to play, or a GM, believe it or not, 27 different PbtA games in 2019. Isn't that wild?
Holy crap.
I know. I played Masks, Apocalypse World, Demigods, Monster of the Week, Monster Hearts, Urban Shadows, all 12 or more times because of this weird challenge called Ladder of Insanity. But the highlights for me in particular, the ones that were kind of the new hotness, as it were, is I now have a home group. Now that I've moved here to the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And we played Demigods, but we're right now playing Bite Marks, which was, Bite Me was the name of the game when it went to Kickstarter. As Becky Anderson of Black Armada Games thing about a werewolf pack and their pack dynamics. It's good. We're 3 sessions in, and it's intense. Becky, in the interview for Plus One Forward, talked about her favorite move being the spill move. She was not wrong. That move, from the first time in the first session when somebody hit that move, everyone kind of just stepped back and went, whoa, that was really cool. And there's a provoke spill, so you can push people to spill, and it just would go round for round. Every of the 3 sessions, every session someone's like, yep, I'm going to provoke you to spill. I'm going to make you say what you really feel right now. And there's mechanical weight and heft to it, and even a reward for it. It's gorgeous. I love it. Bite Marks has such a tight design. Okay, I've played more not PbtA games than I've played PbtA games.
Sure.
So there are times when I'm like, dice should hit the table right now. This is a thing where I'm interested and want to disclaim decision making, right? But that move doesn't exist because this Bite Marks is a very tightly designed game. There isn't a go talk to random townsperson and see how it comes out move, right? It just doesn't exist, which I think is really interesting because it pushes you back to the core loop of what is interesting, which is the pack dynamics, player-on-player drama. It's similar to Monster Hearts in that way, in that the moves are very refined towards particular interactions. And I think that's fascinating to me. I get used to games that I've got to move for everything, and that's not what Bite Marks is about.
Yeah, I had some friends reading through the rule book pointing out the word pack comes up substantially more in the rules than the word wolf or werewolf. It's a game about packs, not being a werewolf.
Absolutely. In fact, the whole werewolf stuff is pretty loosely defined. I mean, again, I haven't read the whole book. I've been playing from the playbooks, basic moves, and the MC moves, so I haven't given it a good read. I'm waiting for the physical hardcover, plus I'm lazy. So those 2 things, I'll just totally own up to it. So yeah, I hear you. It is interesting that it's pack dynamics. And when we do stuff in the pack, the system sings and pushes us along. And when I stray to the everyday stuff and the humdrum, the system is there for me when I want it, but it becomes a little bit more of a free-forming game. So that just is teaching me where to push in the game, and I think that's cool.
Yeah, I've definitely encountered that design with a few other games. The Sprawl comes to mind, so I'm interested to hear how that shakes out. I've had the offer to go play Bite Marks, but I haven't really taken anyone up on it, but it might be a 2020 thing for me.
Ooh, nice. What about you, Rach? What were your highlights in 2019 playing Powered by the Apocalypse games?
Well, I've been part of 2 campaigns. Rob and I have been playing one-on-one Powered by the Apocalypse. We've often played Urban Shadows in the past, and we started a Monster of the Week campaign, which I think I talked about in our GauntletCon episode, where it's an fanfic alternate universe focused on 2 major NPCs from the Urban Shadows game. And what if Rach's PC from Urban Shadows wasn't there? What if these were the 2 PCs and they were running around the world solving mysteries and hunting monsters? And that has been super cool. It's been a really neat creative fiction building exercise to ask questions about these characters and explore what would they do in these situations, because action in Monster of the Week is very different than action in Urban Shadows. It's a lot more getting the ever-living snot kicked out of you and then getting back up again. It also has been giving us the excuse to, in our Urban Shadows campaign, we were really focused around Iceland and the lore and mythology surrounding that, and now we're moving around the world. So our first storyline happened in Lithuania, I believe, and talked about the Teutonic Knights and a lot of mythology and necromancy involving that. And our next storyline is going to be in England and also invoke, I swear to God, we're going to play this, invoke mythology from the game Summerland. We're intending to play it over Christmas. So that's been a lot of fun and very self-indulgent. I've been also playing Legacy Life Among the Ruins, which I will not shut up about. And that has been amazing and beautiful and wonderful and life-changing. And God, it's just been great. That's been on hiatus for a little bit, although we have started scheduling games for 2020. So I'm excited to get back into our next age where we're going to be following a little bit more of an adventuring party who are terrible people who have fallen outside of the system. And we're going to see what great works of humanity we're going to build collectively or possibly burn down collectively. I think it might be leaning towards the second one for this time round.
Oh my gosh.
In terms of newer Powered by the Apocalypse games, I've run Root, the quick start version, because the new version, the full version, isn't out yet, and I've really been enjoying that. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, and it wasn't quite living up to the expectations that certain people, I think, had for it, but it really grabbed me in terms of playing mercenaries who are involved in this conflict and having opinions on a conflict, but aren't necessarily movers and shakers in that conflict, and seeing what happens over time. I'm really excited at the idea of sitting down and playing a full game of that. I ran Escape from Dino Island at a monthly meetup where my party were horrible, terrible people, and I mean that in the most loving way possible. They kidnapped a child and they strapped a bomb to him, and it was awful. But we also had space for everyone to announce that the reason they were going on this heist was not because they were criminals who wanted the payout, but they were all in love mutually with this paleontologist who pulled the group together. And they got to spend moments talking about, and this was the moment where I realized I was in love with this man and I would do anything for him, which blew my mind because this was a game about criminals and this was a game about people who are willing to do awful things for bad reasons. But love was the driving factor. I was just as shocked as anyone.
That is pretty shocking.
In terms of what is available on the market now, I put Passing on my list. That's a little bit of a cheat. I played the playtest of Passing in late 2018, but it was available as an ashcan in Gen Con 2019. And I think that game is playing around with some really interesting ideas. And if you haven't given it a read, definitely go check that out. Yeah, so a good mix of new and old for 2019 for me.
Nice.
It's been a while since we've had a real solid topic episode on Plus One Forward. And it looks like we've been still playing a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse over the last 12 months. Clearly, we must have learned something from our experiences, right, Rich?
I hope so, other than we're both probably real tired.
Well, I mean, it is coming to Christmas, and Christmas is when I sleep. Beyond just telling gaming stories, there might be interesting thoughts or lessons or experiences we can share with our listeners to inspire them into building new gaming resolutions for 2020. And I mean, we might even have gaming resolutions of our own.
Oh, gaming resolutions. Yes, you've piqued my interest.
That brings us to the topic of this episode, which I would like to pitch the title as Lessons from 2019.
Nice.
How do you feel about that title?
I like it.
I would like to start with my first lesson of 2019, and this is a player-related lesson.
Nice.
And I think focusing on players is very important. We talk a lot about getting the most out of your GMing or your MCing experience, but let's talk about being a player. Let's talk about what we can do to shake things up a bit. I titled this subtopic, Playing Outside of Your Comfort Zone, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Grab the Strange Playbook.
Ooh, I like it. All right, I'm here for this.
If you're looking to shake up your Powered by the Apocalypse experiences for 2020, I would like to propose the following idea. Make a character using a playbook you normally wouldn't grab. I had an experience this year playing in a Masks game where I had mapped out in my mind the playbooks I want to play. I had a short list with rankings of this is what I really want to start with, and if that doesn't happen, I'm going to go here, and if that doesn't happen, I'm going to go to this. When we got to the point in character gen where we were picking out our playbooks, the other players all expressed interest in the playbooks I had that list for. I wasn't allowed to play the Harbinger, the one I had been daydreaming about all day before the game. Was my game ruined? I decided to take a chance, and I went with a playbook outside of my normal archetypes. I grabbed the Soldier out of all the remaining playbooks. The Soldier is not a typical Rach character. I like playing reckless, charismatic characters. Meanwhile, the Soldier's move that you start with has the trigger when you have time to closely observe your opposition before a fight. That's not like a normal Rach thing to do. I go into the middle of the fight and I observe the fight while I'm kicking ass. But let's consider for a moment what could happen if you reach for a playbook outside of what you would normally find comfortable. The playbooks that don't immediately grab your attention still have equally valid ways to interact with the fiction. I don't think there's a designer out there who is going to put a playbook into a game that is intentionally bad or intentionally non-functional, as a strange way to mess with the players or punish players that make bad choices.
Right.
I would also recommend that if you pick one of these playbooks that is outside of your comfort zone, to really strongly lean into what that playbook is trying to do and not try to subvert it, even though it's going to be tempting. Playing to the playbook could show you a new way to look at the game and spotlight different mechanics than you're used to looking at. I'm not suggesting this new playbook will become your new favorite thing, but the experience might be worthwhile.
I agree. And one of the cool things about a Powered by the Apocalypse mini-series is that word mini, right? You can take some chances. This isn't like you get stuck playing the cleric in the next 3x 4-year-long D&D campaign, and you don't want to choose the thing that you don't want to commit to. You can do this. You can do this because usually it's going to be 7 to 10 game sessions. We're talking like a quarter of a year. So I wholeheartedly recommend this, Rach. I think you've got a great thing. Keep going. Tell us a little bit more.
For what actually happened at this particular Masks game, my Soldier started the game with a lot of friction with the delinquent because, of course, that's going to happen. The delinquent wanted to burn the world down and cause chaos for the sake of doing it. And my Soldier was very by the books. We do things a specific way because that's the way we've been told to do it, and wasn't willing to think outside the box. Over the course of the game, those two characters ended up teaming up and learning more about each other and about why they thought that way and challenged each other's perception of the world. They had these huge payoffs, both in terms of action and emotion. There was this great scene at the end that involved my character had a mechanical arm, and the delinquent was like, no, here's the time where you flip the bird at the guy. This is when you have to kick the bad guy when it's down. And it's so weird to talk about it in the aftermath, but it was just so good and so beautiful at the table, even though it sounds ridiculous. The mechanics of the Soldier playbook really fed into how I interacted with the game and setting up those moments. It's a well-designed playbook and a well-designed game. It's not meant to trip you up by assuming, oh, you want to play the action playbook, so you only want to play part of the game. It is fully interacting with the game and what that game is about. Easily one of the best Masks experiences I've ever had. And a lot of why that experience was good for me was because I took a risk and I did something I normally wouldn't do.
That is really cool.
Rich, what lessons have you taken away from 2019?
Well, there's one particular thing I'm pretty proud of for 2019 vis-a-vis PbtA, and that is reskinning Powered by the Apocalypse games for different settings. And when I say different settings, I mean Star Wars.
I mean, of course, the best setting.
Yeah, Star Wars. That's my thing. I've probably mentioned a few times, if I remember correctly, Hut Cartel, where I took Mark Diaz Truman's amazing Mexican narco fiction RPG Cartel, which is kind of Breaking Bad meets telenovelas, as an RPG in the, I believe, late 90s. And I said, how can I get this into Star Wars? Because Hut Cartel, hey, let's do that. And I did that last year to some success. Then this year at Origins, I offered that up as one of my 2 games for Games on Demand and ended up running it multiple times. In fact, there were some GMs who ran games, and one of the things you get for being a GM at Games on Demand, besides the awesome experience of playing with really cool people, is you get this jump the line ticket that allows you to kind of jump up and pick one of the games that you most want to play. And I had the honor of 2 different GMs picking Hut Cartel. So I ran it a bunch live, and I normally had only ever run it face-to-face, but it just really gave me that confidence of like, okay, this is cool. I want to do this with some more PbtA games. And so I reskinned a few others. One of them, which was kind of the first, let's really push a game that doesn't easily go into Star Wars, and I took Monster of the Week and I retitled it Bounty of the Week. The idea behind that was, instead of being monster hunters that are going from town to town, it could be a team of bounty hunters. And ostensibly I thought, well, maybe we could tweak the idea of the mystery to be a hunt. But this was before Mandalorian came out, so I didn't have the magic of things like fobs. So I ended up leaning more into the Monster of the Week idea. And while they were ostensibly bounty hunters, they ended up hunting Nexu, and they ended up hunting brainworms, and that really went well. Like the first particular session, they went after a person. That didn't seem to sing as well as when they went after like monsters. It just seemed to click a lot better. The biggest part for Bounty of the Week was understanding how you take a game that Monster of the Week wants to be Supernatural, the RPG, Supernatural, the TV, long-running TV show, or Hellboy, or Buffy, which has a lot of magic in it. And yes, Star Wars has magic, right? It has Jedi. But it's a certain flavor of magic, and it's also a very limited magic. The time setting of my game was going to be during the original trilogy of movies, so the idea of 3 different player characters who could all whip out the Force just seemed weird to me. So I thought about it a lot, and I ended up taking the big magic move, which is one of those where you have rituals, and I cut it out whole cloth. Just said, this is not a move that you have access to. Then I took used magic, and I was looking at the idea of splitting it to like taking the good options and calling that using the Force, taking the bad options, calling that call upon the dark side. But it still didn't feel right. But I didn't want to take away those options. And James Mullen of Groundhoggeth Games, I was chatting with him on Discord about it. He said, "Hey, Rich, why don't you just call it used technology? Because in Star Wars, often technology is like magic." I'm like, oh, wait a second. Let me look at these options. And I looked at the options. I'm like, that's freaking genius.
It's so good. Like, because there is that element in Star Wars of we have all this technology, but we aren't quite sure how it works, other than, it just works.
Exactly. And it's not technology that you necessarily have to have bought and paid for. We don't have to set it up. It's a thing where you whip it out. Like, whoa, Boba Fett's got like a little grappling hook. Who even knew? Boba Fett's little jetpack has a missile on it. Who even knew? We didn't need that until it was in the story. And so that's what used technology became. And thanks to James, that unlocked it for me. For the playbooks, that was the next step in one of my big learnings that I'll talk about as I give tips at the end. It was really about trying to find the playbooks that have the most recognizable touchstones in the setting that I'm trying to portray. So I wanted to have an expert playbook, but they have access to all kinds of ancient magic. So I made that more like old Force artifacts or technology that is like magic because it's so alien and weird. The professional, which is one that works with an agency, I just swapped that out to where they're working for one of the guild houses. That worked really, really well. We had a player who made a professional, and I was like, this snaps, like, bam, it just locks right in. The wronged was one that I wanted in there because it just felt nice and emotional and raw. But the wronged is weird because they are supposed to have been wronged by a particular monster. And I didn't like the idea of that monster being an alien species, like I hunt Aqualish, or I hunt Wookiees. That just felt kind of oogie to me. So I swapped that out with organizations like the Hutt Cartels or Black Sun or Imperials, various things, groups, and organizations. And that went pretty well. But I also looked at the playbooks and I wanted to have a couple of playbooks that were a little bit more on the whimsy side of Star Wars, the ones that kind of fail forward a lot, that swashbuckling idea. So I had a couple that I used. I took the mundane from Monster of the Week, which is the person that just stumbles into the mystery. It's kind of the Scooby-Doo, Shaggy idea. And I renamed them into the trainee. So the trainee is a person who's this is their first day on the job of being a bounty hunter. And someone chose the trainee, and it was brilliant, Rach. Oh my goodness, that trainee was just the bomb diggity because the trainee also, they will flip around and back their way into stuff. And that character's innocence as these guys were doing dirty, grim jobs was just, oh, it was amazing. It clicked really, really well. I went from Bounty of the Week to more of a middling success, and I'll talk about why. And that's where I had wanted to do Night Witches in Star Wars since 2018. I wouldn't say it's a white whale. It was just one of those, like, I'm going to make this happen. And I decided after Bounty of the Week went pretty well that I was going to commit to it and make it happen in Night Witches. Now, Night Witches, of course, World War II era, female Russian bomber pilots dealing with missions and being ill-equipped. And then during the day, because there are night moves and day moves, the daytime moves, they're dealing with life on the base and a great deal of misogyny. And what I decided to try to make Night Witches work is to find something that in the Star Wars canon could work to sub in for that misogyny. They were rebels, so it was really easy to say they're hardscrabble, they don't have all the equipment that they need. But the twist that I added to Star Wars canon to try to make this frame up work is that all the player characters were non-human species. So we had a Togruta and we had a Kashiri, and if you don't know what those words mean, non-human people, it's fine.
Aliens.
Alien species, exactly. And the idea of this setup was, instead of being on a base with Russian airmen, it was they were assigned to a battle group from an Imperial who turned coat. And so their Y-wing bombers were in a hangar bay on a Star Destroyer. So they're surrounded by ex-Imperials. So there was a great deal of speciesism, like all the humans were the ones who were in charge. And that was an interesting approach in application. This is where it was middling. Tonally, it was a little off. It didn't feel as Star Warsy to the player characters. I think the one moment where I got it to sink in, where it had some grit to it, is when one person was hurt and they went to a med bay and they found that the Imperial medical droid didn't have files on their particular species. They just know how to patch up humans. And that was one where they were like, oh, that really sucks. And that was a cool moment where it felt like Night Witches in Star Wars, but a lot of the surrounding tone was a little weird. That said, when the missions happened, that is tight. Night Witches is great at bomber missions, and it's the kind of thing that I want to integrate into another frame. It may not be a Night Witches hack. I may just take all of the moveset for bomber runs and reskin that into a more Star Warsy flavored around it style game. So there was enough that I learned from reskinning Night Witches to Star Wars that I think I can apply it to other games.
Do you think you would go back and play around with the day moves, or do you think that's just a total write-off in terms of mapping it to Star Wars?
I don't think it's a total write-off. I do think that the idea of them being on an Imperial Star Destroyer maybe was just a little too far-fetched for anyone to buy into, and that if I could have had the struggles that they deal with fit better within our understanding of the original trilogy of movies when I had set the game, that it probably would have had more, like it would have, the gears never lined up, like the teeth never lined up in the gear. I know I'm speaking vaguely. It was more of a feel thing. It was more feedback from the players after every session. So I wouldn't necessarily give up on it. I wonder, though, if the amount of effort that it would take for me to find that right positioning is worth it versus just taking the parts of Night Witches that worked really, really well for emulating a Star Wars huge battle action and dropping that into a different game. So actually going from reskin to hack is where my thoughts are on that one.
Still, like, just because I do like fighter pilot fiction and I like Star Wars fighter pilot fiction, so the idea of setting Night Witches in Star Wars is really grippy to me. So part of me is like, but we could maybe go re-explore this or something.
Maybe we will. Maybe you and I should just record a little, how do we do this thing? Or maybe you just talk to me offline and point me in the right direction. I'm not opposed to the idea. The last game that I reskinned that I wanted to talk about was The Veil. The Veil is cyberpunk RPG. Its default setting is here on Earth, and then a little bit out into space. There are 3 iterations of the Veil: the Veil Cascade, and the Veil Inheritance. So as I approached this one, I felt a little more confident because I had Bounty of the Week, I had Hut Cartel, and I had Night Witches, and all those were in my head as I go into it. And this one was much easier. The Veil was tweaking the gear to suit Star Wars flavor. That was easy. Playbook choice was the big thought process for reskinning with this one, because the Veil, especially Cascade and Inheritance, really leans into the idea of virtual reality, of people's memories and emotions, and how to recode and control those things, and that all felt a little too far away from Star Wars. At the end of the day, when I chose playbooks to offer up to players, I had a very limited playbook set that I felt comfortable with. That said, the ones that we had there really slipped in. Sabine played an onomastic. The onomastic is one that has this thing called a cybertome that they're hiding from this group of chasers called the Iconoclasts. We renamed the cybertome a holocron. Boom. Just like butter. The Iconoclasts, I decided on the back end that it was a Sith-related thing to tie into Star Wars, really easy. I even had pictures of like Sith masks that I'd found online, and I said, they're wearing this. And they're like, ooh, that's spooky. And I'm like, yes, it's spooky because it's Sith, because I'm a nerd. That worked really well. Walter played a catabolist, which is a playbook that wants more and more cyberware. In the intro of his character said that this was a guy who idolized Darth Vader and said he was the perfect, like the epitome of a cybernetic organism. I'm like, wow, that is dark, dude. And I loved it.
That's a take.
Oh, it was so good. It was so good. The attached, which is a person that has a robot or an android or some kind of machine that they are part of, chose a Rolly droid, like a BB-8, except a dark BB-8. So everybody leaned hard into the Star Wars flavor, and just having the right playbooks in the Veil set it up for success. And a little side observation on the Veil. Running the Veil in this way, reskinning it, it taught me a lot about where the gems of the Veil exist. And some people will say, oh, it's rolling with your emotions. And I agree. That is definitely the like cool new tech of the Veil. But some of the other gems are, they don't lie within the basic moves. Because when I went through the basic moves, I printed it out and I literally wrote, here's the Apocalypse World version of these moves, just so I could quickly reference it, because they all are named different, and I want to be able to go, oh yeah, you want to read a sitch, bam, it's this one. You want to analyze, bam. And so I had my quick reference. There's nothing new tech-wise in the basic moves. It all exists within the playbooks. The playbooks are where really interesting stories with the Veil will happen. More so than a lot of other PbtA games. The PbtA games, a lot of them, I can just play it with the basic moves. The playbook moves stand on top of it, right? It might give you extra options, or it might give you a +1, or it might give you a different flavor. But the playbooks within the Veil, I am finding, have these subsystems, similar to like something from Masks, you probably recognize from Masks, you played that a bunch, that help to tell these wholly different stories that can only exist for that particular playbook. Doesn't make them an island, but gives them these avenues and pathways and choices that are really fascinating. I've run and played the Veil maybe 20 times, and this was the most fun I had with the Veil, was seeing a different take on these playbooks and seeing how it could be explored in a different setting, and I liked it a lot.
Not to go off in a weird tangent, I always felt that the strongest sister game to the Veil is, oddly enough, Spirit of the Century, in that Spirit of the Century is about a bunch of characters from pulp novels all coming together for this mega crossover. And looking at the Veil, it feels like all these cyberpunk heroes from these different flavors of cyberpunk coming together to tell this giant crossover novel.
Yeah. Oh, I get you. That is really cool. A nice observation. I like that.
And I think that would do really well in Star Wars, because with Star Wars, a lot of the times, especially like I think back to the expanded universe novels of my youth, I know they're not canon anymore, but whatever. A lot of those characters could be the hero of their own story, but because Star Wars is so, for lack of any better word, big, they're all shoved in the same story together, and you have these egos often pulling back and forth. And I think, again, the more I think about playing Star Wars using the Veil, the more it feels like what I enjoyed when I was younger reading these EU novels.
Nice. I like that. So to sum it up, because I've gone on for way too long, the tips I would have for reskinning Powered by the Apocalypse games outside of their default settings: approach it from the genre that this particular game seeks to emulate or lift up, and those mechanics. Start there. Start from what this game engine is built to do, and shape your setting around it. Just like with Hut Cartel, where I came up with an excuse to have a situation on Coruscant that made Cartel's setup work well. When I took Monster of the Week and started off saying we'll hunt bounties, but then I leaned back into hunt monsters, that's where it really works. Having the Veil on Coruscant as well, I did a lot of stuff on Coruscant this year, because there's a lot of high tech and it felt like it would work the most. That's where you need to start. Start there. Don't try to make an elephant dance. Try to make an elephant eat hay in a different area. Once you have that game picked, The next step is look at your basic moves, right? Because that's the stuff that everybody should be able to do. So a basic move, because of its frequency, needs to serve the setting and also reflect the setting. Just like how I had to take Big Magic completely out, right? There may be basic moves that you look at it critically and say, does this exist in this setting? And if it doesn't, remove it. If you have to alter it, alter it. And sometimes just look at a different frame. Use technology instead of use magic. Bam. And then the last step, very important, is look at your playbooks. Start off with the looks, the moves, and the gear. The looks and the gear, that's a big part of your reskin. There's so much caught up in names, appearance, and stuff that people carry that is emblematic of a particular setting. And so you really need to pay close attention to that. I remember when I was running Hut Cartel early on, and there's one who's like a miniature gang leader, and so you have to create your gang, and there's a names list, and I had not changed the names list, and so they were names like like very obviously Mexican names, and someone made a joke about that, and they were like, oh no, and I'm about to scramble, and someone else said, hey, wait, our Wookiee is a Chewie, so just get over it. And so we moved past that hurdle. But it was one of those where I was like, oh man, I'm a little caught up here. But luckily somebody made a joke about Chewie and we got past it. So those moves also, just like with the basic moves, that's stuff that playbook is going to want to do a lot. Once you have those, you really have your reskin ready to go. And you may have to adjust to taste and just introduce it by saying, this is a reskin of this other game. If we run into something that's going to be a little awkward or weird, we can take a look at coming up with a custom move or adjusting for it. And let's just go forward with the best intentions. And that's what's worked for me. Even the Night Witches, which I call a middling success, the players all had a really, really good time playing it, and so did I. It's just one of those when you step back with a critical eye and try to figure out how would you do it better, that, I have those conversations. And
that's a lot of good lessons, because I've been thinking about, personally for me, taking pieces of media I've enjoyed, and there isn't a one-to-one Powered by the Apocalypse game to dump it into. But the idea of reskinning, I haven't been brave enough to go fully in yet. So the lessons that you've learned for reskinning to Star Wars really do inspire me to go and maybe give it another shot.
You should. That's been a big part of the second half of 2019 for me and Powered by the Apocalypse, and that's where I feel like I learned the most. Thanks for letting me go on and on for a bit. Rach, do you have any other things? Come on, talk to me. Let me listen for a little bit.
I have a story about reskinning, but on a much, much smaller scale, and a fascinating learning experience featuring, as I've observed from our conversations so far, the true workhorse Powered by the Apocalypse game of 2019, which is Monster of the Week.
Yeah.
We've played an awful lot of Monster of the Week between the two of us. I'm not quite sure what to call this lesson, but bear with me. It involves discussions of Monster of the Week and the way that we present violence in Powered by the Apocalypse. Consider, if you will, running Monster of the Week at a public RPG event. One of your players usually seeks you out for your heartwarming games like Witch Quest or Golden Sky Stories, and you're not really sure why he's here to play Monster of the Week with you. After the game, he's clearly had a few too many beers, and he turns to you and says, Rach, why does my flake have so many guns? And that was a question I spent a lot of 2019 thinking about, and I don't mean that in a joking way. I decided that I wanted to run urban fantasy Powered by the Apocalypse at conventions and public events in 2019, and that the game I was going to use for that was Monster of the Week. I'm really fond of urban fantasy, but games like Monster Hearts and Urban Shadows require a lot of heavy lifting on the part of the MC, and I felt lazy this year. I wanted something that would basically just run itself. Like, you build a mystery, you only have to do that once at the beginning of the year, you get your players to make a bunch of monster hunters, and then you go, right? Like, it's really easy, right? Wrong. Wrong. I wasn't expecting how wildly different the players would react to the amount of violence in the game, and how I would have to shift the game to accommodate those differences. If I were to be a little bit critical of myself, the first run of this Monster of the Week adventure, the one that inspired this conversation about why does the Flake have so many guns, is as you would say in your words, Rich, a middling success. I had some players that leaned really hard into the whole monster hunting thing, and then I had the one player, the one I mentioned, who really wanted to play a thoughtful, supportive character and saw the potential for that in the Flake, be really frustrated with how the Flake was positioned to be violent and be monster slay. Which, I mean, that is the point of Monster of the Week, right? Like, I think it's pretty clear from the description what this game is meant to do. But his disappointment in the game really stuck with me. I didn't take it personally per se. I didn't see it as a personal failing of me or the system. I did a lot of thinking about why games about monster hunting and traveling from town to town would be appealing to players who weren't necessarily in it for the whole hunting aspect. Maybe people who are enchanted by the idea of 1980s action TV shows like the A-Team. I mean, the A-Team are kind of violent, but not really violent. And they're not hunting monsters, but they kind of are in a metaphorical sense. So I thought about that for a while. And I thought about how can we pull more of that kind of pulpy violence that isn't necessarily shooty stabby. When I ran the adventure at a convention next, I mentioned to the players to look at the weapons, not just look at the character type, but also look at the weapons and think about the game's premise being monster hunting and think about what their characters are and what type of weapons they would choose and what would be appropriate. Keeping in mind, I mean, obviously you're going to be slaying monsters. That's why we're here. But think of what type of weapons best suit the character. Several players happily changed their weapons around to not be guns and leaned into their characters a little bit more. I remember one character in this particular one-shot decided all their weapons were actually gardening tools, and then I think they rebuilt a sword as a hoe.
Wow, that's crazy.
Completely not effective at combat, but was really interesting and would be like, I have this prop. Can I use this in this interesting, complicated way? And I'm like, sure, go dig me a hole with that shovel. So this type of reskin was dead simple to do because all you need to do is change the names of those weapons and maybe look at the tags. And I found the players actually really loved digging into the tags and what the tags mean. Like they brought a lot of flavor to the game and really made it a much more vivid experience. I felt, at least from the MC, like I could really picture these characters and what they were doing and why they were using the tools they were. It wasn't just like, oh, I have a golf club. I think that's on the mundane, right? Like I have a golf club because it's there and it's funny. It was like I have this taser and this is this past adventure that involved the taser and why it's important for me and why I carry it around as opposed to a different weapon. In both of these cases, in both the one-shot I ran in Toronto and this convention game that was in Ottawa, the players solved the mystery and destroyed the monster without using direct violence. Maybe not what the game was intending, but it still solved the mystery in a way that felt right and satisfying, and ended with the players being really proud of their solutions. In one game, I think they opened a portal and dumped the monster into the middle of the Arctic Ocean and just let it there to rot. And I think in the other one, they trapped it in a box essentially and let it starve to death, which was horrific and awful and felt right for that game. But they didn't directly take the hit points down to 0. To give a different perspective, the third time I ran this adventure with the exact same mystery, I had a group of players who were dead set that they were going to hunt down this monster and they were going to drag it out in a full-out fight because that's what they wanted to do and that's what made them happy.
Mm-hmm.
It was an equally fun time. It felt satisfying for them. It was, for many of them, their first Powered by the Apocalypse game. A couple of the players came from a Dungeons & Dragons background, so I think that was the mindset they came into, but they felt it was equally satisfying to chase down the monsters, and they were trying to lean a little bit into using moves like stat checks, but we got around that as the game developed, and they still, like I said, enjoyed themselves. The lesson that I took away from this is twofold. One, adapting and hacking the weapons in a Powered by the Apocalypse game, super easy. I'm not sure why we don't do this more often and think about how cool our weapons could be and what they could say about our characters. I just finished recording an interview talking about the game Thirsty Sword Lesbians, where your sword is part of your character and says something about your character. It just doesn't have like a mechanical benefit. It's part of your aesthetic. And I really think we could be doing more of that, because being cool is part of Powered by the Apocalypse, at least for me, and especially in a pulp game like Monster of the Week. Second, how players can react to violence that is explicitly pulp violence and not reflecting real world violence can have a huge range. I was really not expecting to see all these different experiences with the exact same scenario. If I were to sum this up in a final conclusion, sometimes what the rules of the game demand might not match up with the rules expect. And there's a lot of flexibility there that we can play around with as MCs.
That is really well put. That is a fascinating observation. Man, I'm going to have to...
New topic episode, maybe?
Yeah, that's something we really need to dig into later. That is cool.
Going back to what we were talking about earlier, gaming resolutions for 2020. What's your Powered by the Apocalypse resolutions, Rich?
Oh, I love gamer resolutions. I've been doing these on and off for a long time, but the PbtA gamer resolutions I have. I want to release the beta playtest version of Working Stiffs. This is a game that Jesse, Ross, and I have been working on. It's an undead fighting office dramedy powered by the Apocalypse RPG. I've ran it a few times this past year. Jesse, with his amazing layout skills, has created some playbooks and basic moves that we could hand out, but I really think it needs some more refinement. I'm actually running it at Con of the North, which is coming up in February 2020, and I'm hoping to get some feedback on that and kick it into gear. So that's one. And the other one is I want to run or play the following Apocalypse Engine games: Apocalypse World Burned Over, Circles of Power, Comrades, Descent into Midnight, Hydro Hackers, Never Knows Best, and We Used to Be Friends. I think that last one I can pretty easily talk my wife into playing with me, because it's basically Veronica Mars, the RPG.
It definitely is. I'm going for your list going, yep, would play that, have played that.
Yeah, Comrades and Descent into Midnight, guess what? Probably running them in Star Wars.
So where would you set Descent into Midnight? I want to know. Is that a Naboo game?
That is probably going to be on the homeworld of the Mon Calamari and the Quarren. Because
so you're not going to run a Gungan game?
I'm not going to run a Gungan. I could, but I'm worried that too many people would try to do Jar Jar's accent too much, and not enough Boss Nass. Now, if they want it all to sound like Boss Nass, I am here for it.
Can I play a talking seal, like show up in the West End Star Wars? Oh, shoot, I don't remember the name. There's that Golden Treasure one with the scuba diving stormtroopers.
Yes.
Talking seals. And now I'm blanking on, because I use that adventure all the time as this example of, like, this is the adventure of the torture rules, and here's the adventure with, like, the talking seals. Yeah. Behold how wide this game can be.
Yeah, West End Games went far afield in the many years they had that license. Pretty crazy. What about you? What gamer resolutions for 2020 do you have for PbtA stuff?
Okay, Rich, we finally have to play an ongoing Powered by the Apocalypse game together. We have been trying to do this in the background for quite some time. I think 2020 is our year.
Yes, has to be.
It was supposed to be fall 2019. Did not happen. 2020.
All right, it's on my radar.
I was inspired by your list of games that you want to play, so I did some thinking myself. I really want to play Zombie World. I hear wonderful things. I played Airlock and really enjoyed that, and I really want to try Zombie World Prime as it were out. I would love to play more of Root. It was very evocative when I ran it as a one-shot, and I want to see how that game evolves over time. I know the quick start's not going to have everything there, and knowing Magpie, I'm willing to bet Root, the complete form, is probably like a 2021 thing at this point.
Possibly, yeah.
I don't remember from the Kickstarter. But getting a little bit more into Root, I keep going back to wanting to go back to OG Apocalypse World. You mentioned Burned Over. That might be really grippy to play around with what's going on there. Girl Underground, which is something I had seen making the rounds on This is going to be a little bit far afield. Japanese indie RPG Twitter.
Wow.
That's a place that exists. And they've been doing translations of it. It hits a lot of the notes I really like storytelling-wise and thematically. And I keep hearing people say wonderful things. Definitely want to get more into those. Those are the ones that stand out. Maybe playing around a little bit more with Magpie's Ash Cans and some of the other small games that are starting to float about as one-shots. And finally, personal project I've set up for myself for 2020 is I want to do a little zine every month. And some of them are going to be gaming and some of them are not. But one of the ideas I have that is specifically powered by the apocalypse flavored is I want to make a playbook that's distributed as a zine for the game The Ward, which was an ash can about medical dramas released a couple of years ago by Magpie, based on my professional healthcare experience. This might be something that appeals to only me, but sometimes I daydream about, like, how would I make this a powered by the apocalypse move while I'm at work and bored, which isn't that often, but I think of things in particular, the distribution of power in that game, because it does heavily focus on the doctors and the nurses are kind of an outsider character a little bit, but that doesn't reflect my professional experience where I don't have really tight day-to-day working relationships with the doctors on my team, but the nurses, they will come over to our counseling room and they will eat donuts with us and talk with us. And I want to bring some of the more vivid, detailed aspects of hospital culture into that game. Again, even if it's only for me.
That is really cool. If you can't write a playbook you love, then why are you doing it? It sounds like you would really rock that. I've got a buddy who's just itching to play The Ward, so if you're looking for someone to read over your stuff, let me know. Adam Minnie is thirsting for the ability to play The Ward.
I really want a move that is called something like, why is there so much candy in here? After a student yelled that out once.
Well, Rach, it has been a fantastic 2019 doing the show with you, doing the Gauntlet Con episode, which was really fun and kind of freewheeling. Planning, plotting, all the interviews that you've done, our movie nights episodes that
I am excited for more movie nights.
Me too. So excited. It's been great. Thank you so much, Rach, and Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year. And I'm excited to see what 2020 brings for us, all the exciting games that we're going to see the Kickstarters fulfill from the interviews we did in 2019 and all of the neat stuff that's going to come to our attention in 2020.
Absolutely. And Happy New Year to you, listeners. I hope 2020 is an amazing gaming year for you, too.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Schelke. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Hammer of Bill. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.